I was a math teacher, and I had always taught in alternative education settings, whether it be continuation school or community school. And after I had my first daughter, I decided when I was ready to go back to work, I kind of wanted to work part-time, and I actually went to church with someone who worked in our youth group, and I was helping with the youth group, and he was a TTS out here, I believe, at the time. And he said, oh, you should come check out CYA, because it was CYA at the time. And I said, oh, okay. And so I actually was at Carl Holton when that was open, because it was 2001. No, I take that back, 2002. So I applied there to be a sub, and I worked a couple days a week. I loved it. I lived very nearby, so it was only a 10-mile drive, so I loved not having a commute. And I thought, this is a population I love. And so I started there part-time. Carl Holton closed in the meantime, so I moved over to DeWitt Nelson. After a couple years, I was hired full-time as a math teacher. I would say, and for those of us that are still here that worked at DeWitt Nelson, I think we would all agree that was like the best of times. I loved that job. We had our population was kind of the 18 to 25-year-olds, a little older guys. There was usually 400 to 500 at the institution, I would say. It was much larger than we are now. But we just had the school area, we just had a lot of fun at work. I mean, it was a really great place to work, and I think with that little older population and more maturity, we just saw some really good things happening, whether it be in school, education-wise, earning their GED or their diploma, and also we had some very good vocational programs. We had a wood shop program, and they did great work, and people could at that time, pay for the materials and have work done, so people would have work done for their house. Honestly, we built a house during my time working there, and we contracted with them. They built all the cabinets that we put in our house. And so it was really cool to be like, wow, and just to see that the skill that they had in building the cabinets, being able to paint and stain and just the whole 9 yards and varnish. Anyway, it was wonderful. So it was really hard in 2008. Prior to that, they announced a closure, but in 2008, DeWitt closed. And so all of us kind of scattered places. And I ended up at OH Close for a year, and then ended up being hired here as the mentor teacher at NH Georgian, and then kind of worked my way up through vice principal, principal, assistant superintendent, and now superintendent. But I feel like DeWitt was really anytime I talk to people that was the heyday. And then I actually ended up being on the closure team there and was able to stay over. There was a group of us that stayed probably about 4 months after it closed to kind of close everything up, get everything donated to schools so that we could reuse, because at that point we were closing a lot of facilities and we just had too much stuff, and so it needed to go other places. So anyway, but I feel like some of the connections with the students at that time, we just had some really good connections with some of the students. I always usually hired a TA to kind of help me in the classroom, and so that's always kind of the time to kind of mentor and help them with some of their social skills and that kind of stuff, and just being willing to help others.
So it sounds like you've actually been through the closure process a few times. So to me, it seems you're a little bit sanguine about the process. Yes,
I have been. I mean, this is different because now that there will be no more DJJ, and we had, when we closed Preston, and just staffing wise, we've been through a lot of staff that have been at other places. There's very few of us, very few of our staff that have been around for haven't been through a closure, because when Preston closed, we got quite a few staff from Preston, and then of course down in Ventura at the Ventura facility from SR closing and from Nellis and YT, there's just been a lot of people that have moved due to closures. So we're kind of down to this smaller group. And I think, and I have mentioned it many times before, that when they announced the closure, I was kind of looking at going elsewhere. I was kind of ready for a change and ready to do something different. And when they announced the closure, I thought, oh, I kind of want to see this through. Like, I feel like I've gone through these other closures. I kind of want to make sure this is closed up and packaged up as best we can. And for me, knowing with our school records being so important, I really wanted to make sure our school records ended up where they needed to be and ended up with a good steward overseeing them, because we get typically around 30 to 40 requests a week for our transcripts from prior youth who are going to college, getting a job, whatever it happens to be. And sometimes they've been gone for 20 years, they've been gone for 30 years, and for whatever reason, hopefully they're getting their life together to where it's like, I'm going to go to college now, or I've got this job. So it's really important that we have those records. So I thought I can help make that happen. One of the main things I think we learned out of Farrell was, if you're not tracking it, you're not doing it. It became very evident that you can tell somebody, well, we do make sure they earn their credits. We do make sure they go to school. But if we're not actually tracking it, it didn't happen. You have nothing to base that on. So I feel like when we had Farrell, it really made us track what we were doing and manage it much better. And I honestly, I believe we became a much better school out of Farrell, because there were things that we thought we were doing that we really weren't doing when you get into it, or that maybe one school was doing, but other schools were not doing. And so it made us kind of, every school has to be doing all of these things to ensure that education is happening. When we think back to, in the early 2000s, as a teacher, if I was out, typically my students didn't have class because we didn't have substitutes very much, and it was just like, we don't need to have. But then through Farrell, we said, that's not really okay, you need to have. And so it actually got us money to be able to hire even more subs, so that we would always have a substitute teacher when a teacher was out, because if they're supposed to go to school 220 days or 210 they need to actually go to school that many days instead of 180, because you happen to have teachers out. And that was one of the other things that came out of Farrell, was we kind of had school year round, and so teachers could take off during their time off, but it was all different times. And so you'd have teachers off at different times of the year, which then makes for difficult to manage who's covering a class and if they're going to be gone for a month. And so Farrell gave us that 220-day academic calendar that said the teachers are off these specific times. And then the institution knew those are the times then that we're going to plan other activities, because there's no school going on. So I think in general, I feel like there was a lot of good that came out of Farrell. It really made us kind of look at what we were doing and what was working and what wasn't working. So we know we've had students do well. It's a little harder to track, I feel like, because in DJJ, it's kind of, once somebody leaves, you're not really supposed to have contact with them. There's kind of that whole, hey, they've been in custody, so for us, it's been really hard, because they really have to contact us. We're not going to be able to contact them. And so we have, over the years, we hear stories about somebody's doing well. And honestly, I mean, sometimes there's a few that I get worried about, and you look in that inmate locator, okay, yes, they're not in prison. Like, this is good. Sometimes they are. That happens sometimes. You're like, okay, they're, and especially like with our landscape program, what part of that is they get a forklift certificate so they can drive a forklift. We've had a lot of them contact the teacher for that, and say, hey, I got a job because I have that forklift certificate. And it's a job that at least, they can make a living wage to be able to kind of get started. So, we have some that, and really I think for a lot, I mean, just staying out of trouble and being a dad I always worked with men here, but being a dad, be a dad to because a lot of them come in here and they have kids already and they're not really being a father because they're here. So just to be able to go back out and you can provide for your family and you can get a job and you don't get in trouble again. That's success, and I know for me, I was a math teacher, but I love reading and I love books, and I always would have a library just in my classroom for students because I just knew how important reading was. And so and we would have a lot of guys here who never had read a book till they got locked up, and then they're like, oh, well, I have time. And then they loved reading. I mean, when I was in class, the Twilight series was very, very popular, and so I had gotten that, and they just gobbled that up. and it's, a Harry Potter series, there's just certain ones that they just loved reading, and so I was so happy that they had that time to be able to get into reading because I know for vocabulary and for your language, reading is so very important. So I was happy to be able to do that and see some of that love for reading come out in some of our students.
As DJJ sunsets, what do you think the legacy will be written about this experiment?
I don't know. I mean, there's been a lot of changes between CYA and DJJ. I mean, with how things started out, and then when we were, the tough on crime, and we had 10,000 youth, and then some laws changed and things changed, and we started closing and getting smaller, and we had the Farrell lawsuit, and I don't know. I mean, I would say we did some things really well, and we definitely did some things not so well, which is why probably we're being closed. But I think that's I mean, I don't know. When you're talking about a state agency and just, it's difficult to get everything right, I think. And I pray the counties can get out. I just know there's some things that we probably did that the counties aren't going to be able to do. I mean, I was just at a conference for juvenile court and community schools. And one of the main things they talked about, because this is all educators, is you guys in DJJ had a lot more programs than we can offer in our county, and mostly because they just don't have the numbers. I mean, when you talk about, I've got 5 who are graduates, well, what kind of programs can you do for 5 or for, and we had the numbers to run college a lot easier than some of the other other programs. And then just when we talk about treatment, we talk about, sex offender treatment and, some of those kind of programs. How is that going to work if you have onesies and twosies? So I don't know.